The Galactic Council was the most powerful assembly of sentient species in the known universe. Every species with a planet or system of note had a seat in the council. The Corvith, the Zorvith, the Terek Collective and the Valari, to name a few, all held seats in the Grand Chamber. Their votes decided the fate of empires, trade routes and military treaties. But there was one seat, always empty. The seat that terrified them all. It was the seat for Earth. No one spoke about it directly, but every species knew the truth. Earth had never sent a representative to the council. It was an oddity, a strange planet rich with life and history, yet too dangerous to be left unchecked. The council's rules dictated that every species had to send a representative to the assembly every year. Yet Earth had never once complied. And for good reason. Because the truth behind Earth's seat was one that had haunted the galaxy for millennia. The origin of fear. Long before the Zorvith Dominion rose to power, and before the Corvith Empire even discovered interstellar travel, there was a species that terrified the galaxy more than any other. They were known simply as the Ancients. The Ancients were the original creators of the Galactic Council, building the foundation of galactic peace and order. They were an immensely powerful species, with technology that defied understanding and weapons that could wipe out entire civilizations. They controlled the fabric of space itself. But the Ancients disappeared over 5,000 years ago, leaving only ruins and ancient technology behind. The galaxy fell into chaos. However, before they disappeared, the Ancients did one thing: they made contact with Earth. It was at that moment the galaxy's greatest fear was born. The Ancients had found something in Earth that none of the other species had. Something so dangerous, so unique, that they had warned the Council to keep Earth's seat empty. No one knew the full extent of Earth's potential, but the Ancients feared it. And their warnings were so terrifying that they made the Council take the unprecedented step of keeping the seat vacant. The first warning. In the year 7034 after galactic expansion, the Galactic Council convened for the first time in millennia. Representatives from dozens of galactic species filled the Grand Chamber, their voices echoing through the vast hall. It was a time of relative peace, with only minor skirmishes between the smaller, less powerful species. Then an unexpected communication arrived. A transmission from Earth. The message was brief. The Ancients made a mistake. We are ready. The galaxy will not survive the consequences of leaving Earth unchecked. We will come. The message was sent to the Council's central hub and decoded instantly. The representatives sat frozen, unable to process what they had just heard. Earth, a species they knew so little about, had sent an unmistakable message of threat. The response was quick, and it came from the Zorvith Empire's representative. Earth is too dangerous. They must never be allowed to join the Council. There was an uproar among the other representatives. Some demanded that Earth be exterminated before they could ever reach the level of galactic technology. Others debated what could be done. But the Corvith delegate simply stood up, his voice steady and calm. The Ancients feared this world for a reason. A collective chill spread across the Council chamber. The Corvith, known for their cold logic and vast intelligence, rarely spoke out of turn. If they were afraid, then the Council had to be afraid too. The decision was made quickly. Earth's seat would remain empty. There would be no official acknowledgement of their existence. Earth would be left alone, its presence in the galaxy ignored. For centuries, the galaxy carried on with this policy of avoidance, hoping that Earth, a planet still locked in its infancy of space exploration, would remain insignificant. The second warning. Centuries passed and Earth's seat remained empty. Then, without warning, a new transmission arrived. This time there was no text, only a visual message. The galaxy watched in horror as a lone human soldier stood in a desolate wasteland, his back to the camera. The landscape behind him was one of ruin, with charred remnants of ships and weaponry scattered across the ground. His uniform was unlike anything the Council had seen, dark, almost black, and worn with obvious signs of battle. The soldier turned and his eyes were empty. Hello. The transmission was silent for a moment before a single voice spoke, an unnerving calmness that shook the entire galaxy. We are coming. The message was brief, but its impact was instantaneous. The representatives of the Zorvith, Corvith, and even the Valari, a race once thought to be fearless, reacted with absolute terror. They could not understand how a planet with so little technological advancement could produce such unimaginable power. And for the first time in history, the Council voted on something without debate. It was a unanimous vote. Earth is to remain uncontacted. The last warning, the silence before the storm. For years, Earth's seat remained empty. The Council continued to operate, ignoring Earth's existence as they had for millennia. But those who remembered the warnings of the ancients knew that the day would eventually come when Earth would rise. And that day came in the year 15,750 after galactic expansion, when the first Terran fleet appeared on the edges of Council space. The fleet was vast, a collection of ships so massive that they dwarfed even the mighty Zorvith warships. They did not announce their arrival. They did not send emissaries. There was no diplomatic overture, only the silent advance of humanity's ships. The fleet moved with precision, their weapons ready, their presence a silent declaration of war. The Council was forced into emergency session. Representatives, once so sure of their dominance in the galaxy, now found themselves paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. The Council's grand hall fell silent as a hologram flickered to life. A single human stood before them, a figure clad in black armor, his face obscured by a helmet. His voice, though calm, had an edge of cold, terrifying confidence. This galaxy is ours now. We have come for what is ours, and we will not stop until the galaxy understands the true meaning of power. Then the human's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried an unmistakable weight. An Earth's seat is now filled. For centuries, the Galactic Council had operated under the assumption that humanity was a primitive species, one that was unworthy of notice. The empty seat for Earth had been a symbol of their arrogance, a belief that they could control the fate of the galaxy without considering the one species that would one day threaten everything. But now, the Terran fleet had entered Council space with no announcement, no warning. And they were not here to negotiate. They were here for one reason: total domination. As the human ships approached, a wave of panic swept across the chamber. The representatives of the Zorvith, the Corvith, the Valari, and other galactic powers exchanged worried glances, their once proud faces now showing the first signs of fear. The holographic projection of Earth's representative, a figure clad in dark armor, his voice cool and terrifying, flashed before them. "We have come to claim what is ours." The room fell into stunned silence. The Terran Dominion had just made a declaration of war, but not in the way anyone had ever expected. The Council President, a Corvith elder, stood shakily, his gnarled hands gripping the podium. "We will not allow you to threaten the peace of the galaxy. The Council stands united." "Does it?" The human voice interrupted, cold and merciless. "Then let us test that unity." The moment the words left his mouth, a ripple of unease spread throughout the chamber. The Corvith, once known for their cold logic and unmatched intelligence, knew better than to underestimate the Terrans. For the first time in a long while, the Galactic Council felt the weight of fear in the air. A galactic war council in chaos. As the Terran fleet continued its silent advance, Admiral Callahan of the Terran Dominion stood aboard his flagship, the dreadnought Victory, watching the holographic representations of the Council's panic. His expression remained cold, almost emotionless. It was clear to him that the Zorvith and Corvith were no longer in charge of the galaxy. The humans had seen the opportunity for domination, and they weren't about to let it slip away. The Council chambers on the Council station orbiting a distant star were buzzing with activity. The various species had already begun to discuss how to deal with the human threat. But the discussions were not what they had been before, it was pure survival now. The Valari were the first to speak. Their high-ranking officer, Ambassador Zyros, stepped forward, his long, sinuous fingers tapping against the podium. "This is an existential threat. We must unite and fight back. Earth cannot be allowed to grow beyond its borders." His words were filled with fear, the first real admission that the galaxy's invincibility was an illusion. The Corvith representative, a stoic figure with pale blue skin, stepped forward, shaking his head. "No, Ambassador Zyros. It is not about fighting back. It's about understanding that we are facing something beyond what any of us could have foreseen. Humanity is not like the other species we've conquered. Their resilience, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. We need to rethink our strategy." For the first time, the Zorvith, the most ruthless empire in the galaxy, hesitated. Commander Kellner, once the feared leader of their war fleet, was now sitting back in his seat, eyes wide with realization. "I have heard whispers, rumors about their strength. But seeing them in action? Their tactics are unlike anything we've encountered. We've never fought an enemy that doesn't stop." Kellner's voice quivered as he turned to the assembly. "We cannot win by traditional means." The Terran Ultimatum. Back in the Terran Dominion fleet, Admiral Callahan's voice boomed through the communication channels, heard across the galaxy. His message was clear and concise, delivered without any hint of hesitation. "You have 5 minutes to decide. Surrender or be wiped from existence." This was not a bluff. The Terrans had no intention of negotiating. They had not come to claim territory or to form alliances. They had come to annihilate everything that stood in their way. And with a fleet 5 times the size of any force the galaxy had ever seen, they were ready to do it. The Zorvith and Corvith commanders exchanged frantic glances, understanding for the first time that the balance of power had shifted. "I don't think we have a choice," the Corvith representative whispered to his counterpart, his face pale. "If we refuse, they'll wipe us out. If we surrender, they'll make us kneel. There's no winning here." Ambassador Zyros from the Valari raised his voice. "We must unite. We cannot let them take over. The galaxy is our home." The words were powerful, but they lacked conviction. The Zorvith, once the undisputed masters of the galaxy, now stood at the edge of extinction. The Corvith began to speak again, his voice low and shaky. "What if they don't stop here? What if they're not just after Earth's seat? What if they are after everything we've built?" Kellner's eyes widened as the gravity of the situation hit. The Terran Dominion was not just another power-hungry species. They had come for total annihilation. And the Zorvith, the Corvith, the Valari, and every other species in the galaxy were now at their mercy. Humanity's strategy: fear and decimation. Admiral Callahan watched as his fleet entered the orbit of the Council station. He knew the Council would make a decision, but he wasn't concerned about their response. He had already anticipated it. His fleet was positioned strategically, ready to annihilate any resistance. The Terran Dreadnought Victory, the flagship of the Dominion, was already primed for battle. Its massive railguns could easily shatter the Council station in an instant. But they didn't need to fight. The mere arrival of their fleet had already achieved more than they could have dreamed. As Callahan turned to his crew, he spoke with the calmness of a man who had already won. "Let's give them one more chance to surrender. Let them know what they're dealing with. If they refuse, we wipe them off the map." The human fleet was ruthless. They didn't come to negotiate. They didn't come for power. They came for something much darker. They came for control, not through diplomacy but through absolute destruction. The final choice. The final decision of the Galactic Council was inevitable. One by one each species voted. Some, like the Valari, tried to resist. Others, like the Corvith, saw the inevitability of their end and voted to surrender. And when the vote was cast, it was unanimous. Earth's seat would finally be filled. But not with a representative. With a conqueror. The Terran Dominion's fleet began its final march, and as it did, it brought with it a new dawn for the galaxy. One where humanity would rule with an iron fist. And as Admiral Callahan's final orders were sent, he simply said, "Let them know this is humanity's galaxy now. And no one leaves alive." The Galactic Council had not yet come to terms with the full weight of the Terran Dominion's arrival. The Zorvith, Corvith, and Valari had all failed to predict the sheer force of humanity's ruthlessness. They had underestimated their adversary, assuming that humanity, like so many species before them, would be willing to negotiate or be cajoled into submission. But humanity was not like the others. Admiral Callahan's Dreadnought Victory drifted silently over the Council's central station, casting its long shadow across the galaxy's most powerful seat. The human fleet loomed like a beast in the dark, watching and waiting. Beneath the dark, cloud-covered sky of the Council station, every species began to realize that they had been living in a false sense of security. A galactic empire in the making. The Terran fleet had already dismantled the Zorvith fleet with brutal efficiency. No battles had been fought, no wars had raged. Humanity's might had been proven not in grand, destructive battles, but in the mere demonstration of force. The humans had sent a clear signal, and the galaxy trembled in its wake. Now the Dominion stood on the precipice of a new era. The humans were no longer a distant threat, an unknown species, but the rulers of the galaxy. The Council, that once proud and unified body, now found itself in the awkward position of having to accept the truth. Their peaceful existence was over. The Zorvith Dominion, the Corvith Empire, the Valari sovereignty, all of them had been exposed as paper tigers against humanity's unrelenting march of conquest. "This is no longer about peace," Admiral Callahan's voice reverberated throughout the Council station speakers. "This is about survival. You have 2 choices. Join us or perish. There is no more diplomacy. There is no more negotiation." On the surface of the Council station, representatives shuffled nervously. The fear was palpable. Their hands shook as they pressed buttons on their consoles, sending messages and requests to their homeworlds, hoping for some form of guidance. But there was no one left to give them advice. The Terran fleet had already crushed the largest opposition they had ever known. The Council's debate, surrender or resistance. The council chamber was filled with uneasy murmurs. The species that once stood united as the guardians of peace now sat on the precipice of the unknown. It wasn't long before the first whispers of surrender began. The Corvith, always practical and logical, were the first to give in. Their delegation sat in silence, unable to meet the eyes of the representatives from the other species. There was no question left for them, humanity had already won. The Zorvith, the most feared warriors in the galaxy, were in a state of complete disarray. Commander Kellner, their once proud leader, had vanished after the final defeat, leaving his people scattered and leaderless. The Zorvith fleet, once a symbol of their brutal dominance, had been obliterated in minutes. Their warriors had been destroyed without warning, without mercy. The Valari, although hesitant, started to sway toward the idea of an alliance with the Terran Dominion. They had been influential in the Council, often acting as mediators and peacekeepers, but they knew that in the end, their best option was to secure a position of survival within the new order that was quickly being established. One representative, a hard-faced Corvith warlord, finally rose to speak, his voice shaking but strong. "We are not cowards, Admiral Callahan," he spat. "We are the chosen ones of the stars, not some backwards human scum. We fought for this galaxy long before your kind even existed. If you think for a moment you can take us down so easily, you are gravely mistaken." Callahan, unmoved, nodded slowly. "Then you will learn the hard way." At his command, the Dominion fleet, which had been hovering just out of the range of the Council station, began its march forward. The entire station shook as the human fleet's massive engines pushed forward, the light from their weapons array lighting up the galactic blackness. The Terran fleet was not here for a protracted war, it was here to destroy, annihilate and rule. They were ready for the final culling of the galaxy's power structure. And with the Zorvith leaderless and the Corvith already bowing, only one species stood in the way, the Valari. The Valari's decision: survival or extinction. On the balcony of the council chamber, Ambassador Zyros of the Valari paced nervously. His mind was a swirl of conflicting thoughts. The Valari had long been peacemakers, hoping to balance the conflicting forces of the galaxy. They had made enemies, sure, but they were also an integral part of the council's diplomacy. However, facing the Terran fleet, there was no longer a diplomatic solution. There was no place for balance anymore. The humans were not interested in peace, they were interested in domination. Zyros turned back to the assembly, his face grim. "The time for negotiation is over. The humans have shown us their strength and they will show no mercy. We have no choice but to yield." His voice echoed in the chamber, a chilling admission. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. There would be no more resistance. The human scourge would take what they wanted and leave nothing behind. Zyros stood tall, but inside, his heart sank as he prepared to speak the words that would seal their fate. "We will surrender to the Terran Dominion. We must join them or face annihilation." The human hand of justice. Back aboard the Victory, Admiral Callahan watched as the last resistance crumbled. The galaxy had never faced an enemy like humanity before. The Terran fleet, with its perfectly coordinated tactics, could wipe out entire civilizations in minutes, leaving behind nothing but ruin. Humanity's war machine was efficient, ruthless, and absolutely unstoppable. "Prepare the message," Callahan ordered, his voice steady. "Send the final transmission to the Council. Tell them the terms of their submission." A message was transmitted throughout the galaxy. The Terran Dominion does not seek alliances. It does not seek peace. We seek control. You are now subjects. Any attempt at rebellion will be met with total annihilation. The transmission finished and Callahan leaned back in his chair, watching the galaxy's fate unfold before him. It wasn't long before the first of the Council representatives officially pledged their fealty to the Terran Dominion. The Zorvith, the Corvith, and the Valari were now subjects of Earth. Their once proud empires, now forced to bow to the humans, were forced to watch as the Dominion set up new governments, new infrastructure, and new orders across the galaxy. A new era begins. With the Terran fleet holding all the cards, the galaxy changed forever. Earth's seat, once empty, was now filled with the power of the humans. The Terran Dominion's flag, a shattered planet, flew across countless worlds, marking the birth of a new era. Humanity's swift, decisive action had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. No longer would species fight for survival in a galaxy full of divided powers. The humans were in charge and they had no intention of relinquishing control. The galaxy had never seen a more sudden shift in power. In mere months, the Terran Dominion had crushed its enemies, shattered the balance of power, and brought the once proud Galactic Council to its knees. The Zorvith, Corvith, and Valari, once dominant forces in the galaxy, had now become vassals to the human empire. No longer were they feared conquerors. They were merely subjects under the cold rule of the Terran Dominion. Admiral Callahan, the man who had led humanity's rise to supremacy, stood before the viewports of his flagship, the dreadnought Victory, staring out into the vast reaches of space. It was a beautiful sight, planets, systems, and stars, all of which now fell under his control. His eyes reflected the light of countless worlds, each now tethered to Earth's will. And with that beauty came an oppressive responsibility. The Terran Dominion was not just a conqueror, it was now the dominant force in the galaxy, and such power came at a price. The cost of victory. As the Dominion expanded, so did its crushing weight on the galaxy. Worlds that once thrived under the banner of their independence now fell into line. Their governments dissolved, their economies remade, and their populations were brought under the rule of human law. Those who resisted were wiped out. The galaxy's natural resources were harnessed for the Dominion's war machine, and humanity's influence seeped into every corner of the known universe. However, not all species bowed willingly. The Terran Collective, a union of peaceful sentient insectoid beings who had long held sway in the Outer Rim, had been slow to surrender. They had been watching the Terran Dominion closely, gathering what little information they could on the new rulers. Some of their leaders even argued that resistance could still be an option, that the Terrans, despite their overwhelming might, would ultimately falter under the weight of their own brutality. But in private chambers, the Terran High Council realized the truth. The humans would never stop. They would never rest. Resistance would be crushed as easily as the Zorvith had been. Still, the Terran were not willing to go down without a fight. They began rallying their forces in secret, preparing for an all-out rebellion. The rebellion begins. Tensions reached a boiling point when a Terran fleet launched a coordinated attack against a major Terran supply hub in the Kepler system, deep within Terran space. The operation was swift, and at first it seemed like a success. The Terran ships managed to breach the system's defenses and disable several Terran stations. For a moment, the galaxy watched with bated breath, wondering if this would be the spark that ignited the great war of resistance that could finally challenge humanity's rule. Admiral Callahan, however, did not flinch. He had seen the Terran's desperation, and he knew it was simply the last gasp of a dying species. The rebellion was inevitable, but so was the Dominion's response. "This ends now," Callahan said calmly, his voice reverberating through the flagship's command deck. His orders were swift. The dreadnought Victory was immediately dispatched, along with 10 additional warships, each more powerful than anything the Terran Collective could muster. The Terran fleet moved toward the Kepler system with terrifying speed, its engines pushing through space with the force of a storm. Within hours, the Terran resistance began to falter. Their ships were outmatched, their weapons insufficient. The Terran forces were unstoppable. The last stand of the Terran. As the Terran ships were torn apart in the void, the last hope of rebellion lay with the Terran High Council itself. In a final desperate move, the Council initiated Project Obsidian, a secret weapon developed long before the Terran fleet arrived. Project Obsidian was designed to be the Great Equalizer, a weapon capable of destroying entire fleets. The Terran High Command had kept it hidden from the Terran intelligence for as long as possible, believing that when the time came, they would use it to turn the tide of war. But in their desperation, the Terran leaders gambled everything on it. When the human fleet entered the system, the Obsidian weapon activated. A pulse of energy surged outward, wrapping the Kepler system in a thick shroud of darkness. The Terran ships experienced power failures, their weapon systems locking up, shields collapsing. It seemed for a moment that the Terran had won. But Admiral Callahan was not one to be outdone by a last-ditch weapon. In the span of minutes, his fleet recalibrated, using emergency power reserves to override the Obsidian pulse. The humans were adaptable and resourceful, traits that the Terran had never accounted for. With the Obsidian pulse neutralized, the Terran fleet resumed its assault with brutal precision. The Terran High Council attempted to flee in their command ship, but it was no use. They were tracked and destroyed. The final ship of the Terran Collective was obliterated in a single devastating strike. There would be no more resistance. The price of defiance. As the final remnants of the Terran fleet fell silent, the Dominion's forces took complete control of the Kepler system. The remnants of the Terran Collective were absorbed into the Terran machine. Their technology was appropriated. Their resources were plundered. Every last Terran leader who had dared to defy the Dominion was now dead. The galaxy now understood the true cost of resistance. Humanity's power was absolute, and for those who dared to challenge them, there was only one fate: total annihilation. The Terek's defiance had only delayed the inevitable, but it had sealed their fate. Admiral Callahan watched as the Kepler system was catalogued into the Dominion's expanding empire. He could see the glowing maps of newly acquired systems on the holographic display before him. Every star, every planet now under the Terran flag. But even as he watched humanity's reach grow, there was an unsettling truth that he had to face. The universe was vast, and though humanity had won, there were still other threats. It was clear that the galaxy was not completely subdued. Some species were still fighting for survival in the shadows, and others would rise up again. But in the end there was no longer any question. Humanity's power was unmatched, and the galaxy was now under their control. "Admiral, the final reports are in," a lieutenant said, approaching him. "All resistance has been neutralized. The Terek are no more." Callahan nodded, but his mind was already turning toward the future. The Dominion's work was far from over. The galaxy would bow to Earth. And any who tried to stand in humanity's way would be crushed beneath the weight of their unrelenting power.